Chapter 5. Closing the polling station.
With just 5 minutes remaining before the end of the polling time, that's at 6:55 p.m., the presiding officer should announce that the polling will close in 5 minutes.
Now let's find out, can anybody vote after the time of polling? Only the voters who were already in the queue may vote after the end of the polling time. No voter is allowed to join the queue after the end of the polling time.
To be clear, the presiding officer must permit all persons already in the queue prior to 1900 hours to vote. Section 53(3) of the Electoral Act.
The presiding officer must assign a police officer on duty to identify the last person in the queue at 1900 hours in order to prevent any other person from joining the queue. If there are very large numbers of voters in the queue at 1900 hours and the processing of all these voters will take an excessive amount of time, then the presiding officer should notify the constituency elections officer. As mentioned before, in the case where a polling station could not be opened on time, then after being informed, the constituency elections officer may fix a later closing time for that particular polling station. In such a case, any voters already in the queue at the newly appointed closing time must be allowed to vote, and similarly, no voters may join the queue after this closing time.
What happens after the last voter in the queue has cast his or her ballot?
Immediately after the last voter has placed his or her ballot paper in the ballot box, make sure that you dismantle the polling booths and check if any ballot papers have been deposited therein.
If any ballot papers are discovered, these ballots must be checked by the presiding officer to ensure that they are from the polling station's allocated ballot paper serial number range, and inform the election agents present.
Make sure that the aperture of each ballot box is then closed and a security seal is placed so that no further ballot papers may be inserted into that ballot box. And oh yes, we must not forget, in the case where postal votes were received, then presiding officers must process them before sealing the ballot box. We will describe these postal votes in greater detail in the next section, but for now, just to keep our explanation straightforward, let us proceed to the end of this section as if though no postal ballots were received.
Do not forget that the presiding officer must inform the constituency election officer of the time the polling station was closed.
So, dear colleagues, this completes an important chapter on polling process, and I hope the information that we shared will help you very much during the polling process and that you will follow this information as well.
So Charlene, shall we move forward then?
Oh, but of course, Tafadzo, as the upcoming step is very important and very sensitive.